Let's get started on Introduction to Virtual Machine Fault Tolerance. But first, let's discuss limitations of high availability. To review high availability. In high availability, if an ESXi host dies, then the virtual machines can start on another ESXi host. And the limitation is it takes about 20 or about 30 seconds to 2 minutes for that second virtual machine to start up on the second ESXi host. But if we have a very important virtual machine, such as one that operates a heart machine, we might want that virtual machine to be up at all times. I mean, with no downtime at all. And that is why we use VM fault tolerance. In VM fault tolerance, the very important virtual machine runs on one ESXi host. And then on the other ESXi host, a mirrored copy of that virtual machine is running on another ESXi host. And whenever data is sent to the first virtual machine, it is immediately sent to the second virtual machine, so they are constantly in sync. If one ESXi host dies, the virtual machine on the other ESXi host is immediately available. Now let's compare fault tolerance to high availability. In both cases, we have two ESXi hosts, and if one dies, the second one takes over. What's the difference? In high availability, there is a delay of 30 seconds to 2 minutes, however long it takes for that virtual machine to boot. But with fault tolerance, the second virtual machine is available immediately. Of course, nothing is free. For that to be so, you must have the virtual machine running on another ESXi host. If we look at fault-tolerant characteristics, we can see that the amount of downtime when we use fault tolerance is 0. Let's look at an example of fault tolerance in action. If the primary virtual machine is running on this ESXi host, it will then create a copy on a second virtual machine, and the lockstep technology keeps these virtual machines in sync. If the first virtual machine crashes, that's okay. The second virtual machine takes over, and that becomes the new primary virtual machine. And then what it does is it goes to another ESXi host and creates a new secondary virtual machine. Fault tolerance provides 0 downtime and 0 data loss. To enable fault tolerance, the first thing we do under the Manage tab is to verify that high availability is turned on. And then we select the virtual machine that we want to be fault tolerant, and we right-click, and under fault tolerance we select Turn on fault tolerance, and that's all we have to do. And then when we do that, that will create a running mirror of the ESXi of the virtual machine on another ESXi host, and those two remain synchronized. So if either one crashes, the other one is immediately there. And this concludes our section on VMware fault tolerance. Now let's talk about replication and data protection. Redundancy. The purpose of redundancy is to provide fault tolerance. And an example that you are probably already familiar with is hard disk mirroring. In this server, there are two hard disks. Whenever a user saves data to the first hard disk, it is immediately replicated to the second hard disk. So if either hard disk crashes, that's okay. We're covered. That's hard disk mirroring. Now, let's look at redundancy in vSphere. We've already discussed redundancy of ESXi hosts, and we've already talked about redundancy of virtual machines. Now, let's talk about redundancy of data stores. And this introduces replication. Replication is similar to disk mirroring, but the difference is it is replication between data stores on different disk arrays. And the purpose is to provide data store fault tolerance. You can have replication within a single data center from one disk array to the other, or you can have replication between different data centers. And that way, even if you have a total site failure, the virtual machines can be started on a remote site. You can have the main data center replicating to the remote offices, or conversely, you can have the remote offices replicating to the main office. With replication, it's very similar to disk mirroring, but it is replication of data stores between disk arrays, either within a site or between sites. And the purpose is to provide data store fault tolerance. Now, let's talk about vSphere Data Protection. vSphere Data Protection is backup software. About vSphere Data Protection. vSphere Data Protection is a robust, easily deployed, disk-based backup and recovery solution. vSphere Data Protection is a backup and recovery solution from VMware. vSphere Data Protection is fully integrated with vCenter Server and the vSphere web client, providing a disk-based backup of virtual machines and applications. Let's review what's meant by a traditional network backup. In a traditional network backup, the backup software runs on the server which is being backed up, and that takes CPU cycles from that server. Furthermore, when we do a backup over the wire, that causes heavy network utilization. The problem is that the server being backed up is overburdened, and there is an excessive amount of network traffic, which slows the users down. So what we do is we use the vSphere Data Protection. As you know, virtual disks are stored as files, VMDK files, and this greatly simplifies the backup process, because now a backup is simply a matter of copying virtual disk files. And a SAN backup reduces the load on the production network. A SAN backup is where the backup goes from the disk to the tape backup, and that backup traffic stays on the storage area network, and it doesn't cause any traffic on the production network, and thus it doesn't cause any congestion on the production network. A SAN backup. The vSphere Data Protection Appliance is a dedicated backup server. And as you know, an appliance is made up of a virtual machine, an operating system, and the application in the operating system, which in this example is the backup software. The vSphere Data Protection Appliance is a dedicated backup server. And what it does is it backs up the VMDK files and can save them to tape. And the advantage is that it reduces the burden on the server being backed up, and it does not cause congestion on the production network. The vSphere Data Replication provides VMware replication between disk arrays, either within the same site or between sites. And vSphere Data Protection is backup software. And this concludes our section on data protection and data replication.